Give people a couple more minutes here before we dive into things. But we are, very excited to have so many participants here with us today. We've got several hundred, I think over 350 people planning to attend. So it's going to be a packed house. But thanks to the power of Zoom, all of us can maintain our social distancing, and we don't even have to put on masks while we're here. So we're excited about today's session. Bess, Jonathan, and Joe have got some great commentary and thoughts on what 2021 is going to look like. I can't wait to help host and guide this conversation to cover some impressive ground. So we'll give people a couple more minutes to get in, get your view situated, grab your cup of coffee or tea, grab your lunch. You're not on camera, so it's okay for you to eat, just not okay for us to eat.
Darn it.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to do start getting into things while we still wait for a few people to get in. One of the things I'm going to give a shout out to, my friend and beard critic at all times, Mr. Gary Connolly, who is helping host our slide share today. And therewith, he's also going to be, and he has just started the recording of today's session. We're excited to be recording today's session. For those who, for one reason or another, maybe they got a vaccine appointment last minute and they're definitely there taking that vaccine and not able to attend today. Well, now we're going to have a recorded version so that they're able to see it after the fact. But we're excited to have all of you here today in the audience and very excited. Oh, yep, Vanessa actually just asked that question. You will, in fact, be able to have access to this recording later on. So with that, I'm going to sort of dive in and just sort of welcome everyone here. We're very excited to have today's conversation. Before we get started and get into some of the meat and potatoes of today's conversation, I'm going to hand it over to Richard. And Richard, I think you said you've got a special guest lined up for us, in fact.
I do indeed. I'm very excited about that. Thanks, Brian. Good afternoon. And thank you for joining our Getting the Deal Done webinar series. Today, we focus on the state of New York real estate and set our sights on 2021 and beyond. I'm Richard Haggerty, CEO of the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors. Our trade association represents more than 13,000 real estate professionals in Manhattan, the Bronx, Westchester, Putnam, Rockland, and Orange counties. I'm also President and Chief Strategic Growth Officer for One Key MLS, the comprehensive multiple listing service for New York. One Key has more than 44,000 subscribers and serves the region from Montauk to Manhattan to Monticello. We're pleased to partner with TitleVest and have President Brian Torme moderate our discussion. TitleVest is a leading New York City-based title insurance agency and member of the First American family of companies, offering a full range of services for real estate property purchase and refinance transactions. TitleVest has offices in Manhattan and Westchester and engages in transactions upstate, downstate, and nationwide. TitleVest has won the New York Law Journal's Best Title Agency Award every year since 2013. And before I introduce the panel, I would like to introduce our special guest, the president of the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors for 2021, Crystal Hawkins-Siska, to say a few words and say hello to everybody. Crystal, it's great to have you.
Hey there. Hello, everyone, and happy 2021. We're getting the year off actually to a really good start. I wanted to say thank you for coming. And this is just more of a testament, what you will see today, of the commitment of the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors to helping our members be their best. In addition, I want to just state that this is also a part of the overall vision for us this year, which is fulfilling the American promise. Home ownership is a part of that promise. And I say promise and not dream, because we're looking to make this a reality. So thank you so very much. And please stay tuned and be a part of today's session.
Great, thank you, Crystal. So I'd like to introduce the members of the panel, and it is indeed really a stellar panel. First, Bess Friedman, the CEO of Brown Harris Stevens. Bess is a strong leader, motivator, and educator. She was formerly the co-president of Brown Harris Stevens, and she was also formerly the senior managing director of Corcoran Group's East Side headquarters. We also have Jonathan Miller, president and CEO of Miller Samuel Inc., a real estate appraisal and consulting firm. Jonathan is a real estate analyst and state certified real estate appraiser in New York and Connecticut. And finally, we have Joe Rand, the chief creative officer of Howard Hanna Rand Realty. Joe is also the executive director of the Broker Public Portal an industry consortium dedicated to building advertising-free home search experience with HomeSnap. And also, Joe is the most recent recipient of the Realtor of the Year Award for the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors in 2020. Best Joe, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. And Brian, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Yes. Well, thank you, Richard, so much to you, Gary, Jeff, Kathleen, and the whole HGAR team. And thank you, Crystal, for joining us today as a special guest. We're very excited to have you in the role and help lead the organization into the 2021 in the 21st century. So with that, I'm going to cover a couple quick housekeeping items for everyone in attendance. Questions are very welcome. Our panel is, eager to hear your thoughts and questions and respond to them. We're going to encourage you to use the Q&A function to submit those questions. So that is down for most of you. It'll be at the bottom of your screen. For some of you on a mobile device, it's often sort of at the top of the screen. Select, you'll see all the options. Q&A is sort of the two talk bubbles over each other. So go in there, type in your question. We may not answer and address the question immediately. We may wait and say, oh, we know that fits into some of our sort of agenda outline later and sort of hold the question. And that allows us to do that there. That being said, feel free to use the chat for sort of hellos and hoots and hollers, as I said earlier, to say hello to your friends and co-attendees and the panelists. All voices are welcome. We've got everyone muted. And so far that's really worked well for us as a pattern. If you have a question that you really want to talk through and it makes sense to unmute yourself, you can do that. Submit your question in the Q&A, and when we get to you, we'll sort of call on you and you can unmute and ask your question verbally if that makes sense as well. But otherwise, we're keeping everyone muted just to keep the background noise, other than my dog who occasionally likes to chime in, at bay. So with that, Richard, as is our new, sort of our established pattern, we would love to hear some stats and market moves from you. What's been going on as we clicked over from one year to the next?
Yeah, it's interesting. Our panel is going to really be discussing it, so I'm just going to give a broad overview. But what we saw this year, I've been in this business now for 35 years, and what we saw this year to me was staggering. We had a very strong first quarter. Even though we pretty much shut down real estate and only operated on a virtual basis in the middle of March, the first quarter was still pretty strong. Obviously, because of the shutdown, the second quarter was pretty much non-existent. I mean, you could only do business virtually, so it was really just closing those transactions for the deals that were negotiated in the first quarter. But at the end of the year, I'm just going to really focus on the Lower Hudson Valley. Westchester ended up 14% higher with single family homes, Putnam 20%, Rockland 14.7%, Orange County 8.5%, Sullivan County a staggering 25.8%, and the Bronx was down 10%. So given the fact that we really didn't do any significant transactions in one whole quarter, those numbers to me are just staggering, but it was all fueled by the fourth quarter. And those were really deals that were negotiated in the third quarter and closed in the fourth quarter. And the numbers are staggering. In Westchester County, 57.7% higher in the 2020 fourth quarter over 2019. Putnam put 64%, Rockland 57%, Orange 49%, Sullivan 45%. So the fourth quarter, I think, is probably the strongest fourth quarter we've ever seen, just given the circumstances. There was just so much pent up demand. We're going to be talking about the migration out of the city and whether that's really starting to slow down and come to an end. And that's the panel really has, I think, some great information on that. But I do think that the recovery that we saw is just staggering, and it really did, I think, help the New York State economy when all is said and done, close out a strong 2020. And in terms of price increases, there were price increases all across the board. But the largest by far was 37% price increase in Sullivan County, which just shows you that people were heading out to the suburbs, including the more rural suburbs. Mm-hmm. So I'm really looking forward to today's program.
Yeah, well, me as well. And I think if we were able to quickly ask our audience to raise their hand if they felt like after that fourth quarter they needed a nap, right? I think everyone, all of us panelists as well, would probably all raise our hand and say, boy, do we deserve a nap. But we're going to hear from our panelists today and talk in part about what 2021 holds, because maybe we're not going to get naps. We'll see. So with that, I want to dive into one of our first topics we wanted to tackle is sort of the idea of stability in sight for New York City. COVID, obviously the dense urban environment that New York City represents. COVID, both in starting there as well as sort of having this impact there, has been hit very directly. What do we think and sort of is stability in sight for New York City specifically? And Bess, I'm going to turn this over to you first. You had some really sort of thoughtful comments on sort of what real estate is going to look like in New York City after, sort of as COVID, as the vaccine rolls out and things.
Well, thank you, Brian, and thanks, Jonathan and Joe and Richard. It's nice to, and Crystal, thank you. It's nice to see everybody today. I think obviously having the vaccine in sight is excellent. It diminishes some of that uncertainty. We do need to get it into people's arms, which we haven't been so good at yet. We need a better plan. But I think people are feeling a sense of relief, at least we're seeing that, because there is some sort of an end, in sight, but we're not there yet. So the path forward is going to be a bit tough, but at least we have some resolution. So I'm somewhat optimistic about 2021. And I think it'll be really important that we get the pandemic under control. I heard something yesterday that we're in the next month, we should have a total of something like 500,000 deaths due to the pandemic. And I think it's unfortunate because we were completely unprepared as a country to handle it. And it's not it's not the country's fault that it's here, but how it was handled, I think could have been handled better. And I'm hoping that in 2021, we're able to have a better plan moving forward to get people vaccinated. And I think that will alleviate some of the stress that people are feeling.
Yeah. As we translate that sort of stress into the sort of consumer confidence sentiment and sort of the comfort with making big decisions, real estate transactions being key among them, how do you feel, and Joe or Jonathan, you're welcome to chime in on this as well. What are your thoughts on like that consumer confidence, especially around New York City as a place to pull the trigger and sign a contract?
Well, I can just say that, and I sort of, my quip about this is, look for a V-shaped recovery. V stands for vaccine. And to Bess's point, and the idea that true stability, back to your original question, true stability doesn't really happen until people feel safe. And I think the story about stabilization of New York is much more about inbound, meaning people going to the city, schools, universities open so people can rent, is a bigger narrative than the outbound, at least in the longer term, just because sort of, so many lives are put on hold. Evidence of that is the fact that the rental market in New York City was it still is just crushed. We saw, we're seeing pricing down anywhere from, a median decline in Manhattan specifically about 22%, but some segments of the market it's down 40, as much as 40%, at least what I've seen. But we're not seeing the same intensity of price decline in the sales market. I'm not saying prices are clearly softer and trending probably more softness this year, but it all is going to be predicated on when people feel comfortable being in the city. And just one other point, because I tend to talk too much, is when we think about the suburban market and the rocket ship of demand that counties like Westchester and Fairfield, and then Nassau and Southwark, the counties around New York have seen, obviously, as Richard was pointing out, basically a rocket ship of activity skewed to the end of the year after the lockdown and people came out, and there's this massive release of pent-up demand. But you can't forget that part of the pent-up demand was because mortgage rates fell to the floor. And I tend not to overemphasize rates, but in this regard, it was, this is like the condition you're seeing in these counties is the same you're seeing in suburbs across the nation. I mean, it's sort of correlated very closely with rates themselves. And the point of all this is that contract activity in the suburbs peaked in the summer and has been trending lower, but still well above year ago levels. And I think that speaks to sort of the early sort of outbound, sort of flight to safety, but not financial safety, personal safety. And now we've been seeing an uptick in activity in Manhattan. Contract activity is literally in December just broke or exceeded year ago levels for the first time. Manhattan has been the laggard.
Yeah, we've seen pre-pandemic contract signs, which has been very, given us all a rush of like excitement, and so it's looking pretty good thus far.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to go to your question, Brian, about the city, I think that what we saw, some people overreacted in March, April, May, saying, "Oh my God, the city's dead. No one's going to want to live in an urban environment anymore. The too much density. No one wants it anymore." People, that's crazy. I think what you saw this year and what Jonathan just referenced with the migratory pattern out of the city was largely people who were going to leave the city at some point in the next couple of years. They were at a life stage where they were about to have kids. They had a kid. The kid's living in a closet. They have to get him out of the closet. They need a bedroom. They've hit a certain stage of life. I mean, I lived in Manhattan for 17 years. I never thought I was going to leave until I started having kids, and then it was off to Nyack, right? That's what happens. And so I don't think it pushed. I think there were a lot of people on that white picket fence and they fell over, and a lot of people were up against it and they took the jump. They were going to leave next year or the year after that, and they said, "You know what? We were going to leave next year. Let's go find a place in the suburbs." And so I think that what's going to happen is we're going to see it slow. And then like a year and a half from now, we're going to be saying that, well, no one's moving from the city to the suburbs because they all moved back in 2020. So we're going to lose some of that population going. And I think some of it is not people leaving the city. Jonathan, what are they doing? They're buying in the suburbs. What's your word? The word of the day?
Co-primary.
They're co-primary.
Yeah.
Buying a co-primary.
So that's Jonathan's new word to describe people that are buying a second
I owe you,
home.
Joe.
That's the Andrew Yang. That's Andrew Yang buying up in New Paltz while he's running for mayor of New York City. That's what I think a lot of people did. You certainly saw it. I mean, you see it. I think a lot of people moved to my area, Rockland, Westchester. I think a lot of them moved there, but you saw lots of activity. Columbia, Ulster, Richard referenced Sullivan County. Those aren't necessarily people moving to the suburbs. Those are people getting second homes in the suburbs that they can drive to where they're going to co-primary them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to add, since we're all in a flutter about my word
of the day.
Co-primary, is that the way I think of the word and how it came about is that when people were looking for, in certain, like the Hudson Valley, more than an hour's drive from the city, they were looking for a weekend getaway. And so I think during this 2020, I think many started to look at these markets as a place that they could live for at any period of the year at any length of time, instead of sort of, like the Hamptons, a place at the beach, or, having more open space or whatever, because of Zoom, what we're doing right now. And so I think the takeaway from sort of the aftermath of this is post-vaccine, which is probably a, is going to take up a good part of this year and into next year, is that there's still going to be remote. And as a result, markets that are, in the Hudson Valley, much like Florida and other markets that were seen as seasonal or, not year round, that's all being rethought now, because especially as you skew up in the sort of the wealth spectrum, where an executive might have to go into the office less frequently than maybe somebody that has to needs to be there every day. You'll see the distance that they travel for the periodic commute much longer, but they'll be less frequent. And I think that benefits the Hudson Valley in general as a market.
Yeah, very much so. One quick question that popped into our Q&A, Jonathan, this is going back to a stat you shared about the rental decline, and Caleb was asking to clarify, I think it was 22% drop you mentioned, if I recall correctly. Was that in volume of rentals or in prices? I think he was.
That was median net effective rent. So that would
the
be
price.
the actual rent considering the concessions.
Right.
Rental activity in the city for the Manhattan specifically for the past 3 months have been the highest new lease signings for their respective months, meaning the highest December of all Decembers in the last 14 years. So
Wow,
the
very
reason
interesting.
why you're having that flood of inbound is because rents have fallen so much that it's attracting sort of a younger, less, I don't want to say, well, less affluent or more affordable.
They can now afford it.
Yeah, exactly.
Things
And
have
that-
moved back into an acceptable range. Joe, go for
And
it.
that just goes back to my point that it's not that people are not going to want to live in the city anymore. It's a really good thing when you see this kind of rebirth that, okay, prices go down and now people that, the city needs people like that coming into it. I mean, when I moved to New York City almost 20 years ago, for $700, I could live on 34th Street in a studio, making $35,000 a year as a clerk for a judge. That there was a period. There's been a period of time since then when you couldn't even do that. You couldn't get into the city. That's where Hoboken and Brooklyn and Long Island City and that. So it's good, I think, for there to be a little bit more of a, growth from the bottom in that market. But what it does show you with the increase, what Jonathan just talked about, it goes to what Bess's point was a minute ago, was that, I think the demand is going to be there. I think people are going to want to come back. I'm already having people ask me about, is it a good time to look in the city for a pied-à-terre and stuff like that, because people are seeing, an opportunity for a bargain. Everybody loves a bargain. And there hasn't been a bargain in Manhattan for a long time.
And I think you're so right, Joe. And I think, Jonathan, the stats on rentals that you said, the lease signings, is really inspirational because most leases get signed during the summer. I think 80% of all rental business is done in the summer. So the fact that we have those levels shows you, imagine what we have coming down the road. It's very positive.
Right. And I do think someone made a comment in the, question about we have the moratoriums and all sorts of things that are in play. So I think the rental market for the next year is going to be continue to be price challenged, meaning that affordability, even with this surge in this uptick in demand, which I think is not a fluke. What do they say? 3 data points make a trend, and we've got 3 months of it. At least that's what journalists tell me. That I think rents are going to be challenged, and that's just going to continue to bring. There's still inventory or supply vacancy is like triple what it was last year. So there's a lot to be absorbed, and this is an opportunity. And then when schools begin to open, like colleges, where commuters, like I had mentioned to you on another call that I teach market analysis at Columbia 1 semester a year, and my students that ordinarily would be renting in Manhattan are doing the calls from India, from Africa, from China, and so it was quite a thing, and you could just see people make do. Zoom sort of resolved the temporary problem of safety.
Bess, would you agree? You and I both live on the east side. In April and May, it was a ghost town. There was nobody there. Since the summer on, there is a ton of foot traffic. The stores, with everybody practicing social distancing with their masks on, are full. It does seem like we've rounded a corner.
I agree with you, Richard. It was quiet. It was a little spooky in the beginning. Everybody didn't know because we didn't know what to expect. It was an unprecedented event for all of us. But now it's, I live on 2nd Avenue, and you can't move. The restaurants, people are they're sitting outside, even though it's very cold out. And I think that's wonderful that they're doing that. I have been ordering in, I pick it up to support the restaurants. I shiver too much out there. I'll do it once in a while. But I prefer to eat. I bring the food in. I order from Elio's all the time, and we sit around the table and eat. But yes, I'm seeing a tremendous difference in what the neighborhood looks like versus March and April. It was a little spooky. It was a little scary. So it's changed.
And just to add on to that, is that early on the optics were, to Richard's point, very, it was a dystopian hellscape. You know, that's the way New York was being sort of framed, because you'd be in Times Square and the camera would pan, and you know, there'd be boarded up storefronts and, you know, piled garbage, and it projected to the country, you know, how dire it was in New York. But even early on, even though it wasn't normal and still not fully normal, you know, the neighborhoods like the Upper East Side, you know, I remember going into the city for, you know, various consulting assignments, and, you know, there were still people out in the street, everybody's wearing a mask. But when you were in Midtown in the central business district, it was very empty, because the big companies, you know, the office buildings are like 85% empty. And so they can't support the retail. And they also, you know, that provides a challenge to the rental market as well.
Yeah, and the other challenge, Richard, is, you know, that we faced was not only did we have the pandemic, but then, you know, we had this, you know, sort of this incredible sense of frustration and hurt and pain in the country because of racial inequality with George Floyd, and then we had the riots, and
Right.
at the same time we're seeing homelessness exacerbated all over the city, crime going up. So all of these things, it was like a big bowl of bad. You know, it was,
Yeah.
I love
Oh, bad.
alliterations. A big
I
bowl
love
of bad.
I'm stealing that.
Okay, well, I got co-primary. You can have a big bowl of bad. But I think that whole environment was tense and crazy for everybody. I think
Yes.
it was a mixture of all those things. So to see where we are now, we still have incredible headwinds, but I feel like we're at the beginning of the end in a way, but we'll have to see.
Well, I want to dive in there and maybe use that as a pivot
Cool.
to sort of start talking about some of the things like how are the retail and the office and commercial patterns, like what you all as experts are sort of feeling and believe and prognosticate that we're going to be seeing. Like, what do we think is going to be happening in those markets, especially as it relates back to the residential sector? Right. So what are we going to be seeing with offices and large corporations, as well as the smaller entrepreneurial businesses? What about retail, et cetera? You know, Joe, I may go to you here. You had some real interesting thoughts on our warm-up call and sort of office space finding its balance.
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things that when we talked about it, you know, Jonathan has made the point, I think very, very smartly, that we just don't know. Like, we don't have any data yet. And you know, there's a lot of things in the balance of what will companies do with work from home when this is over, that have the experiences of work from home been strong enough that companies will adapt. And, you know, Jonathan was referencing before the CEO coming in twice a week. So instead of living in Scarsdale, he can move further, or she can move further up and take a
Come to
long
Garrison.
commute. Come to Garrison. And the you know, whether that's going to be part of it, how much we adapt to it, or, you know, I've heard a friend of mine tell me that they just leased space on down in like the Silicon Alley area because it was a great opportunity, because rents went way down and now they could open up, and that's where the young people are going to be, and that's the people she wants to hire, and you know, there you go. So I mean, I think I'd be a little. I think the office thing is up in the air. I think retail is going to be rough. I think that we all know that. We knew that going in. It was already challenged, and then this was a kick in the teeth. And I think that residential investment, you know, if you're buying, you know, to rent out apartment buildings, multifamilies, whatnot, I think there's going to be a little bit of a, you know, rents are going down, like Jonathan said. I think the rental rules in New York tightened a couple of years ago to make it tougher on landlords. I think that there's going to be some downward pressure on investing in that category. So there'll be investment opportunities. You know, somebody said in the chat that it's an opportunity market. I think that's Nikki Beauchamp said it's an opportunity market, and I think it is. But I think you got to be really careful about the opportunities. And I don't think we know right now what's going to happen with some of, like, with office space, and, you know, is the migratory pattern, are people's behavior patterns going to change that dramatically after this?
Yeah,
I agree. I think you're right, Joe, on that. I agree with you.
I'm going to
And I
a
just
couple questions here, because Jonathan, I think you may help answer some of these, and best share, you know, a couple questions from our Q&A and then weave some other things into it. Benjamin asked, what are everyone's thoughts on older Midtown office buildings being converted to residential in the upcoming years? Could a huge supply surge to residential impact the market?
Right. So that's a thought that's been sort of floating around. My office is in a Midtown old, pre-class B type building. It would be, and I just, all the machinations for that seems very remote like that, but certainly potential. I mean, as an appraiser, you look at a property for its highest and best use. I mean, that's what value is thrown off specific to the use that's the most beneficiary to the owners.
Mm-hmm.
And this could very well be, but we really don't know yet. To the point that Joe made, with we were talking about the uncertainty of the future. If you think about it right now, big companies, and I'm probably err on the side of being sort of, high in the sense that, a lot of big companies that I've read about, maybe 5% of their workforce was remote, where they rarely ever came in. Pre-COVID, right? And so, there's talks, so out of context, you hear a lot of narratives like it's going to double, it could double or triple. Remote workers could double or triple. So that's like 10% or 15%, on the high side. It's not 60%, right? But that's the sort of imagery that, and so while we don't know, I think the way I describe right now is that maybe something for the Urban Dictionary is we're at peak Zoom, right? So, people are used to working in their pajamas and all that kind of stuff. But we're not going to be, once the vaccine is adopted and things are more under control or, resolved, there is going to, there's going to be a rethinking. And so that, the companies that maybe downsize, like my company, certainly we have plans to do that in terms of my footprint, because we don't need it, because my employees, half the time can work from home, and we don't need all the square footage that we're paying for. And I think many people are recalibrating. So what that does, as the point Joe made, is we have this not only sort of a youth renaissance in the residential space, but we also have it for young companies and startups and things like that. So, this could take a shape or form that we probably can't even conceive of yet, where it's going to be a process in 2021 to get a better sense of it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that with you, Joe, and with you, Jonathan, it's too soon to tell. But I do think for our purposes, we have a lot of offices. We have 55 offices. And so are we going to look at space differently? Maybe. A lot of agents are now not coming into the office. But I do think, agents do like to come into the office. We're social beings, and it's a relationship business, real estate. And I said this before, but culture is crucial to a company. It's everything. And I think you have to be with each other, share food with each other, laugh with each other, work together, fight together. And I think that is important for residential real estate. So we're not planning to downsize anytime soon. We did close some offices. We may change how our offices look in some way or form. I'm not sure yet, but it's too soon to tell. And I'm not in the office today, but I typically go into the office every day. I was there yesterday all day. It's just a different mindset when you're in the office. You're not going into the fridge to get a Milky Way, or you're dressed properly. It's a different everything. The dog isn't barking, the kids aren't complaining. You're in work mode. And I think that matters. I mean, we're doing this now because we have to, but at some point, I think everybody wants to be able to transition to being in a different mode. My opinion, anyway.
Also, just to add on to that is, with our, the one thing, the problem that we're having in the remote access sort of world that we're in, my firm, is how do you train new staff? And it is especially at a professional level, because as Beth said, you're sort of there and you're engaged. Even if you're not talking to somebody, you're hearing what's happening, and sort of radar goes up for a certain type of situation, and that's part of the experience that you get, is just being with others, and that's much more challenging in a 100% remote environment. That's why I think we're at the peak of that, and when we're done, we're not going to go back to where we were, but we're not going to be where we are right now, and it's going to be somewhere in between, and we don't know where that is yet.
And the space needs may change. Thinking about the real estate industry, like Beth said, I don't think we'd close a lot of offices, because there is a cultural aspect to being in a certain market, and agents are social creatures, and I think that they do benefit from that. I think one of the things that might happen, which would make sense to me, is that there'll be a move away from real estate offices in retail space, unless retail space gets that much more cheaper, into more office space, just to make the space cheaper. I mean, we don't need to be, real estate doesn't need to be in retail space. I mean, in the city, it generally isn't. There are some showcase gallery type offices, but usually you're in some office tower somewhere, which in the suburbs, we still, pay the big square footage to be right there in the downtown. And if we ever talk about closing it, the agent's like, no, we get walk-ins all the time. And you look, there's like a rental walk-in 5 years ago, and I'm still paying $40 a square feet so I could be in a little downtown area. Like, that's what kind of happens. But I think that will shift. I mean, that by necessity, some of those things will shift, not just in our industry, but I think in other industries as people rethink that. We haven't even talked about events. Like, I mean, Manhattan is really, that's an event. There's a big event industry, and that won't come back this year, maybe next year. And that supports a lot of jobs, supports a lot of real estate, a lot of hotels.
Agreed, Joe.
JP asked the question, while many look to downsize office space, do you not feel that some companies may look for more space to sort of provide for social distancing, and sort of like there had been this trend towards very dense, small footprint per head count, densification in the workplace? Are we going to see some pushback on that will lead to, while the head count is going down, they're allocating more square footage per head count? Or, Jonathan, I'll turn to you. You were talking about something that we've employed for a number of years, for the hot desking kind of thing that's been very useful.
Yeah. So in the early days of the pandemic, and everybody was sort of looking in horror at what was going to happen to the commercial office market, there was a lot of discussion about, because there was no thought of a vaccine back then, when that would be, that it was like, hey, we've gone from 225, 250 on average to 175 square feet per employee. Now we're going to expand it. I think the market's going to take care of it. If rents drop, I mean, I've seen firsthand, commercial rents in Midtown, are down dramatically for Class B office. You're going to see people say, well, maybe I can get a little bit more square footage. Like I think there's people that, like someone had said, there are opportunities, and I think there's going to be a rethinking. I don't think it's going to be landlord says, that we're going to market this so that you can have more square footage. I think the sharp drop in the cost of leasing is going to make that happen. And then for your hot desk comment, that's what we're planning. I mean, for the last, I don't know, dozen years or so, I've been working 2 days a week at home, Fridays and Mondays. And I promise, Bess, I'm not getting a Milky Way bar out of the kitchen every 5 minutes, but it's kind of worked. And so I had all my staff can do that. And so when you walk into my office at 1 p.m. on a Wednesday, half my staff is working at home, the other half are inspecting properties, and the office is empty. And I'm thinking, why, what, like Joe's comment about the walk-in renter, like, why am I paying for this? Not only that, I have file cabinets that we haven't opened in a decade because we're all digital. So, companies in my sort of small professional services type companies are going to many are going to employ this hot desk concept, where somebody comes, your employees, they work at home, they work in the office, they're mobile, but you're not paying for a cubicle, an office cubicle that's an homage to all their relatives with all the pictures, hanging, and then it's empty 98% of the physical day. I think that's what's going to be rethought, and sort of, all my company, they'll, take the laptop at home, big monitor, laptop in the office, plug into sort of a generic workstation. I think at least in the demo, that the office sort of market that I'm in, I think there's going to be a proliferation of that strategy.
And now let's take that and turn that back around to especially Joe and Bess. What do you think that means for things like, sort of the desire for people to, from where they're buying, right? If that pattern, what Jonathan just referenced, is going to be something it's not just a 2021 thing, it's a here to stay kind of thing. What do you think that leads to? What is your analysis as it relates to like what neighborhoods or sort of markets are going to see a boost from that? Are there specific property features or amenities? Are people looking about their square footage differently? Are they saying, oh, well, now I want a little bit more square footage because 2 of my days are at home, or 3 of and my spouse is doing the same? What are your thoughts, not just within this sort of pandemic period, but really as we look past it, about longer term trend impact?
Well, I think certainly the pandemic was the catalyst for people to reimagine how they're living, and because nobody expected it. So I think we are seeing that people are, wanting outdoor space, wanting more space, wanting home offices, that sort of a thing. We saw a little bit of that. It's hard to say moving into 2021 what could be different. I mean, as Richard had talked about in the beginning, our outer regions like Connecticut, New Jersey, Palm Beach was up something like 300% for us. Miami, those areas were, and the Hamptons were bonkers. So those areas, did so extremely well. And as we know, New York City was challenged because a lot of people, I think, left trying to figure out what they were going to do. Similar to what Jonathan had said the other day, I think after 9/11, it was quiet until January, and then the market just roared, and people came back and doubled down and came back from wherever they were, and the market moved again. And I do think that New York City is going to do very well in 2021. I don't think it's going to be, crazy nonstop, seller's market. It's still a buyer's market. We're still price correcting. We still have oversupply very much. But having said that, the person who commented, I say this over and over again, it is an opportunity market. Rates are incredibly low. There's great supply. People are negotiating. People understand the realities. And this is New York City. Theaters are going to open. Restaurants are going to open. The creative tension that lives here is going to be here, and people are going to want to be here. So I'm doubling down on New York City, my prediction for 2021. The other regions, I think, will still continue to do well, maybe not as crazy as it was in 2020.
I think to Brian, I think the way to think about this is that there are things that COVID changes in the short term because of the public health issues, and then there are things that trends that COVID accelerated that will outlast COVID. So, for example, I think JP said before, our offices, are people going to continue to practice distancing after COVID? I would say no. And I think people have short memories. We'll get 6 months after everybody, by middle of 2022, unless there's any kind of resurgence, people will be shaking hands and hugging again and stuff, and people will be happy to do that. I don't think there's going to be any dramatic change in that. I think there'll be some behavioral changes with masks and things like that. And there'll be reminders, stay at home if you're not feeling well and whatnot. But what Jonathan was talking about before is the fact that what COVID did was it accelerated adoption, for example, of Zoom. We're at peak Zoom, like you said, is Urban Dictionary second word of the day, the peak Zoom. That our acceptance and comfort level with doing meetings like we're doing right now advanced 5 years and 6 months. Like, we would not have been at this level until 5 or 6 years from now at our comfort level, having the equipment. I'm sitting with 3 lights pointing at me. I've got a boom mic. I never had all that stuff before. I've got a green screen I'm not even using because I'm tired of putting it up, and whatnot. But all that stuff is about that stuff's all going to stay. And that's what's going to, you know, the behavioral changes of, wow, I really can be pretty productive at home, which a lot of people probably doubted before. That for me, it's the Snickers bar, by the way, Bess, not the Milky Way.
Yeah,
I
I
like
forgot
them
to
both.
mention that. Yeah.
The
All right.
Snickers.
Yes, I like them both. And Three Musketeers. So go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, Joe.
But to go to the real estate point and what's going to affect that, I would say this. I think she's right. Bess is right that New York City is going to be fine in the long run. I think there'll be some market corrections. There'll be people that will lose money. There'll be people that will take the opportunity to make money. In the markets in the suburbs, what we're seeing right now is a combination of organic growth. I mean, sales in the market, as Richard said, were up 50 to 60% from last year's fourth quarter. Some of that was just a reflection of sales shifting from the second quarter to the third and the fourth, because we didn't have any real activity was so far down in the second and third. But we also had prices go up all year long, culminating in being up in the fourth quarter by like 20% off of last year in some markets, and regionally for the year up 12%. What's happening with that is to some extent an artificial, that's what COVID is impacting pricing right now in the short term in two ways. One, it's all that migratory, all the people coming out of the city accelerating. Many more people come from the city than came at this time last year. Those are all higher end buyers for my market. I mean, if you're coming from Manhattan, you're probably a higher income person than someone who was already living in Rockland, Westchester, Putnam, all the other counties. So they're skewing, the mix of properties being sold is skewing higher because there's a lot more high end buyers coming into the market, and they're competing for higher end homes, and they're pushing the prices up, and just the mix of properties is changing. And the other way mix of properties is changing is that the economic impact of COVID is disproportionately hitting lower income people, wage earners rather than salary earners. And that's really unfortunate. We should be doing more from a public policy standpoint to help people that have been have been hit more indiscriminately with this. But what that has done for the housing market is it means that the upper end of the market is healthier than the lower end of the market in terms of a price point. Condos didn't do as well as single family homes. Usually the housing market grows from the bottom up. The people sell the condo, they buy the house. Person who sells the house buys a more expensive house. Now it's all the activities up here. There's still activity. Sales were still up in condos, but not as much because you're just not getting, there just isn't as much activity, and the economics hit more hard at that market area. And we saw the same thing in rentals. Rentals in our market were down, but prices were up because the people renting were higher income people, but there were fewer of them in the renting. They were more opting to buy. So there's some short-term impact, but the longer term for the suburbs, to go to Bess's point about where the city is going to be good, I think the suburbs, you know, with rates where they are, and I think prices still have not come all the way back in nominal terms back to 2005, 2006. We're almost now getting there, and that's not without adjusting for inflation. I think we still have some appreciation in pricing to come, and I think sales are going to be pretty robust this year, not artificially, but legitimately because of demand and activity.
That's really interesting. Now, Richard, you had some follow-up, at least a follow-up question, I think, for Bess.
Yeah, well, actually, all three. I want to touch upon politics only as it relates to real estate. And certainly it looks like we're going to have some good news, hopefully.
Me too.
Where we're going to have a relief package coming out of Congress that will also benefit states and cities and municipalities. And we certainly need that. But my concern is New York State has often looked at real estate as a piggy bank, and especially in New York City. And we've won some battles, we've lost some battles, but my concern is New York using their budget problems right now, using real estate as a way to try to bail themselves out of those budget problems, when my concern is it's really going to actually squash any type of recovery. And they're not going to achieve what they hope to achieve because they'll be chasing people out of New York City, and they'll be chasing people out of New York State. And how do we make an argument that it's going to, at the end of the
finer
day,
point on that, and maybe direct the question specifically into things like pied-à-terre tax
and salt, the cap on the salt deduction. I mean, Richard, it's such an important point, just specifically for New York. city. We have been so divided politically. Unfortunately, there's the Democratic Socialist agenda, and if you've ever looked at it, it's extreme and it's scary, and it's defund the police, empty the jails, don't go to Israel. I mean, these are some of the things, tax the rich, that kind of stuff. And we all need to try to get back to being moderate in the middle, because we don't want to have things that are going to punish people just to sell a narrative, to get political gains. And I think a lot of our state senators like Brad Hoylman, has been pushing this pied-à-terre tax, which would really be detrimental to New York City. And currently we have something like 37 city council seats that are coming up. The comptroller's race is coming up. Brian Benjamin, who is running, who is a moderate, would be great. The mayor's race is coming up. If we don't get people more to the middle, this sort of Democrat capitalist mentality, the crime is gonna go up, homelessness is gonna go up. People aren't gonna invest and buy in New York City, because if it's not safe, nobody's coming here. It'll be like, Jonathan, you said it'll be back to the 70s. It'll be back to the 70s.
Yeah.
So we gotta be vigilant. And I think that right now, it's a great point, Richard. Now is the time. I mean, I think we've all woken up from being a bit complacent and not doing anything, COVID, all the stuff, racial inequality, everything has gotten everybody involved more. Voting, the election, we saw a great turnout. And I think now we have to start to really get involved and dig in to support New York. Otherwise, we're all going to be in trouble. There won't be a real estate market to fight for if we don't get involved, is my opinion.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, that's so well said, is that the simple fact that well over 50% of the tax revenues that New York City receives are from real estate in various forms. And the sort of the idea that the wealthy don't care about their taxes is absolutely wrong. You just have to talk to all the people that are buying in Palm Beach right now, and other Florida markets that we're tracking. It's unprecedented. There's about 1,000 people a day coming into Florida right now. And a large part of that has to do with the taxation difference between Florida and the Northeast, which is, is known for, high housing prices because of density and high real estate taxes. The other thing is that the pied-à-terre tax, or the second attempt to get it passed after the dust settles, is actually going to cause a tax loss, a revenue loss when you net it out. And so this becomes, you're not quite sure. Like, I always thought that raising taxes were to raise revenue, not to reduce revenue, but you're turning, but maybe I'm mistaken in that regard. But the idea is that, the actual source of tax revenue to maintain service levels is being hit. There was there's a question in the Q&A about, like, how many people have actually left or expected to leave. And I've talked to about a half a dozen different economist friends that I would tell you an economist joke, but this isn't really the venue. But the basic issue with all of this is that we're probably going to lose after we net out. There was a New York Times story in the beginning of the pandemic in the upshot section, which is always terrific, where they estimate about 420,000 people from New York City left, and not permanently, but left in some form or another, just from the second half of March to all of April. That's an astounding number. And I think about 40% of that was from Manhattan specifically. And the reason for that is because Manhattan has greater wealth, therefore greater mobility, right? So the wealthy, can move around. They buy a place in the Hamptons, buy a place in Scarsdale. Greenwich is, seeing astronomical activity after being sort of, skipped over during the city's boom over the last 5-7 years. So the sort of the numbers being thrown around are the city losing somewhere between like 40 and 60,000 people, which in the scale of the city isn't that much. But it also means that probably they're going to be replaced with lower wage earners because of the affordability. So it does have an impact on tax revenue.
Yeah.
So this is actually a very important issue. And not only that, it's important to Westchester and Fairfield, as are indelibly linked to the city, and it's in these regions' best interest to influence the direction of influence New York City's direction, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, can I just add, I know, Joe, I don't want to interrupt,
Okay.
but just to Jonathan's point, just because people have enormous amounts of money does not mean that they're willing to just waste it and spend it in New York City because they can. They won't do it. If they're going to be taxed annually, this egregious tax, they're just going to go someplace else, which is what they have done. And
Right.
I just want to back up one quick thing that I said is that, the whole idea of democratic socialists as defunding the police and, anti-Israel and all of that. I want to just say, because I was a prosecutor and I was a legal aid lawyer, I believe completely that we need to have police, but we need to re-educate, reimagine how the police work. They need to understand there's certain biases and all that other. So I think it's important that we have to shift. There are a lot of problems with policing, and I want to address that. But we can't just, knock it all out and expect us to run a city without having police in place. There's a lot of men and women who risk their lives every day and do a really good job, but we do have to fix some of the systemic problems. I just need to say that. Sorry, that's the legal aid lawyer in me. Go ahead.
Well said.
Brian, two quick things about the taxes to go to what Richard talked about before. One of them, the problem with some of these taxes, like a pied-à-terre tax, is that it relies on behavior staying the same even after the tax.
Exactly.
The problem is it's like a sin tax where they put a tax on cigarettes and they say, oh, great, we're going to make this much money on cigarettes. But then people stop smoking because they don't want to pay the cigarettes.
Or a black market, right?
So yeah, that's right. They go black market. So, what'll happen is people won't buy as many pied-à-terres. Okay, well, that's not good for the housing market. Like, you're not hurting the person who buys so much as you're hurting the people who are trying to sell or all the industry that relies on that.
Cleaner.
And then the second point I would make about taxes, which kind of goes to what Bess was saying, is that taxes are like a lot of things. People care about the value. Like it's expensive to live in New York. I'm still not moving to Florida. You know why? Because Florida looks like just a strange place to live for me when I see what's going on there. And I like living in New York, and I think New York's a great place to live. And you know what? I live, I'll pay more to live in a place where I want to live. So do I have to pay more in taxes? Yes. But what I want, and what I think most people want when they want a well-run government, they want a well-run city. The problem people have right now in New York City isn't so there is a unpopularity with regard to the way this city is being managed right now. And I think that, if you can charge the high taxes if you give services in return. If people don't feel like they're getting the services, that's when they feel like the taxes are not a good trade-off.
Agreed. Well, so we're nearly to the top of the hour. I want to put one more question to each of you three, which is if we gather ourselves here 1 year from today, so now we're in January 2022, what do you think is one thing that wasn't happening in January 2019, but we will still be seeing a year from now? What is one pattern that's going to have changed and it's going to stick around post-vaccine deployment, all that kind of stuff? What's one big thing that you think you're predicting, or we'll come back a year from now and check these predictions?
Zoom. I just think Zoom is going to be, like Jonathan said, the peak Zoom. I think Zoom is still going to be a something that we're customarily that we're going to do. It's going to be a part. That's, I think that Zoom is going to stay.
Best grabbed onto Zoom. She claimed that one.
I got Zoom.
Darn
Sorry.
it. That was mine. Just to add on to that is, so I'll get half credit for that. And then is that I think continuing education is going to be like virtual. I think conferences and communication between members and organizations like MLS Systems. I think it's embedded. It doesn't mean there's going to be, events and people are going to see each other in person, but it's not going to be 100% in person. It is going to be a sort of a mix, and that's what we're going to sort of learn and figure out. So this time next year, I'm probably going to be coming into the office regularly and savoring, face-to-face communication with other people.
Yeah.
Well, they hit the lifestyle stuff. So I'll just say this, because there's a lot of people who are watching who probably would want to hear this, which is that in Westchester, the Hudson Valley, and I think also Northern New Jersey, which is another market we cover, I think 2021, both prices and sales will be higher in the year than they've been, at least as far back as we have records, and probably forever. The highest price, the highest average price, highest number of transactions. Some of that is cheating because we've already baked the cake for the first quarter with the pipeline, and we know that the first quarter is going to be 40% above last year. So it would take something really bad happening to derail it by the end of the year. But I think we're going to we were at or close to all-time highs in sales and prices last year, and I think we're going to blow it out this year. I think that the market's just going to continue to be very strong. So that's going to be different from the fall of 2019, as the market will be higher than it's ever been before.
I agree. And I'm going to echo something that Della Leathers put in the chat here, which is remote closings. I sit on the American Land Title Association Technology Committee. And, when back in 2019, if we're gathering in the fall of 2019, which we did, and looking forward to what is the adoption of e-recording, online, remote notarization, like those kind of technology adoption rates, and when are we going to see it adopted across, there's a little over 3,000 counties nationwide. When are we going to see the midpoint, the 50% mark? That prognostication was many years. Now, as I sort of look forward, I look at that and say, the pandemic has hit the gas pedal on that. And we have so many companies who are already technologically set up have jumped on that. And now there's sort of pattern shift acceptance, people willing to shift pattern away from, oh, this is the only way to do a closing is sitting around a table. Oh, wait, we can do it this way. The adoption of that has sped up quickly during the pandemic. And I would prognosticate that if we're here in a year, we're going to have seen that pattern both stick around and continue accelerating, so that the companies, that are in the transactional, all the closing paperwork stuff, title companies, settlement companies, bank attorneys, that's going to become much more of a commonplace part to your closing experience. It's not going to be the real estate agents and the loan officer and the bank attorney and the title company and all the lawyers all gathered around a table, at least at not the same percentage as before. So
agree.
That's mine. Richard, do you have any closing words for us?
Yeah, my closing thought, Brian, is we actually have to have a session where you're actually a panelist as opposed to asking. I'd like to be able to ask you some questions because you're one of the most knowledgeable people in the industry. And I think it's time that you actually share some of your insights and wisdom, because I think that would be fascinating.
I'd be honored.
I agree
I
with
live
that.
up to these three, but I'd be honored.
Bess, Jonathan, Joe, this has just been awesome. I cannot thank you enough. We're going to have to do it again. Thank you all who joined us today. And
thank you, my friends.
2021 is a great year, and be safe and be well.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Well, it was great seeing
Thank you,
everybody.
guys.
Great weekend.
Thank you.
It was great. Great to see you. Thank you.